Hey everyone. So it's good to be here. I'm really excited to get into today's live. Today we're going to talk all about attachment styles, what attachment styles are, how they're formed, and the four different types of attachment styles in relationships. For me personally, learning about attachment styles was really helpful to understand the types of relationships that I wanted to be in, the types of people that I wanted to connect with, and why I was acting a certain way in a relationship. Knowing your attachment style is really key if you want to understand how you're connecting with individuals or you're not connecting. So understanding our relationship dynamics, it's really important to get our relationships in life and why we are the way we are in relationship. And the reason why it's important to understand is because relationships make up the juice of life. Really, if you're in a healthy relationship, life feels good, and if you're in a bad relationship, our spirit tends to go down. So really understanding how you're being in any given relationship and why you're being that way, it's really valuable. When I first came across attachment theory, I was really moved by it because I understood why I had been avoiding certain relationships in my life. And then once I saw that pattern, I could start working with that pattern. So in today's video, we're going to get into the four different types of relationships. The first type is the avoidant. Then the second type is the secure. The third type is the anxious. And then the fourth and last type is the worst of both worlds, avoidant anxious or anxious avoidant. And so in this video, I'm going to explain all four of these. I'm going to go deep down and share with you guys what each one is and how it's formed. And then I'll open up for some Q&As. If you guys have any questions at all, feel free to put them in the comments section. If you have any thoughts, feel free to put them in the comments section as we go on. And if you guys can, if you like what I'm seeing here and you're getting value from it, please share and subscribe. Here we go. So the first attachment style is secure. So security, the secure attachment style is that person who feels safe opening up to relationship. They're okay with connecting with other people. They're okay with drawing boundaries and saying no and saying yes. They're okay with just being their true self. And whoever comes into their life, that's great. And whoever doesn't come into their life, that's fine. They're safe and secure within themselves. They don't feel like they necessarily need anyone else in their life to be a crutch for them. Now, that's not what every relationship is about. A lot of relationships can be crutches. Where, we'll get into that later on with the anxious style of attachment. But every relationship is someone supporting one another, and it can be reciprocal. It can be one person giving and one person taking. There's all these different ways that we can do relationship. But the healthiest relationships always come from people with secure attachment theory or secure attachments. And secure attachments say, I'm secure within myself. I know my boundaries. I'm proud of the person who I am. I'm willing to do this. I'm not willing to do that. And that's the starting point for the relationship. And that's a really healthy starting point. That's getting into a relationship from a want place, not a need place. Anxious security type or anxious attachment styles are a little bit different. They're coming from a place of need. I'm very anxious and worried if you're not constantly connected to me because I don't trust the relationship. I don't trust you to be there for me. And that feels really gripping and tight. I remember when I was in one relationship where I was more of a secure attachment style and she was more of an anxious attachment style. And I could just feel she was always trying to grip me or trying to contact. She would call me up crying sometimes randomly. And so I felt closed off in the relationship. I felt like I didn't have the freedom that I necessarily wanted. So really, when it comes to developing these relationship styles, we just want to ask ourselves, which relationship style are we? Are we secure? Are we anxious? Are we anxious avoidant? Or are we avoidant? And just knowing which one of those categories you fall in can help you see some of the patterns and how you're developing relationships. And it helps you understand why things might have not gone the way that you wanted them to go, or why things might have not occurred the way that you wanted them to occur. So the secure attachment style is really the most healthiest attachment style. That's the one that is preferable to have. You're comfortable displaying interest in another person. You're comfortable displaying affection. You're comfortable being alone and independent. You're able to prioritize your relationships. You know how to draw clear boundaries and how to stick to them. You're also capable of accepting rejection and moving on despite the pain. But you're also capable of being loyal and sacrificing when necessary, because that can be a part of relationship at times. They, if you're a secure attachment, if you have a secure attachment style, you're not afraid to trust people. Because you trust yourself. So as you trust yourself more, you can just generally tend to trust other people. That's usually how it works. However we get in relationship with ourselves is how we get in relationship with other people. Does this make sense, you guys? You guys, if you have any questions or thoughts as we go throughout this, please put them up on the comment section and we'll go into it. And if you're just joining us now, guys, we're going over the 4 attachment styles in attachment theory: anxious, secure, anxious-avoidant, and then just avoidant altogether. So if you're secure in yourself, you're drawing boundaries, you're not afraid of losing an individual, you know how to prioritize your relationships, you're not afraid of rejection, you're not afraid to show intimacy and true love and care, you can be open with the world. That's what it means to come from a secure attachment style. Now, the next attachment style is what we call the anxious attachment style. And the anxious attachment style is really characterized by relationships where people are nervous and they're stressed. So they need constant reassurance, constant affection from their partner. They have trouble being alone or single. I was in one of these relationships about 4 years ago, and I would always get calls at random times where she would be worried or concerned that I was going to leave the relationship when there was no signs or evidence. In fact, all the evidence pointed to that I was staying in the relationship. I would drive 4 hours to see her on the weekends. So the anxious attachment style, they're always looking for reasons as to why the relationship might be failing or why it might be going wrong. Does that make sense? A lot of people who are have an anxious attachment style, they'll also succumb to unhealthy or abusive relationships. And the reason for this is because they have trouble trusting people, even if they're close to them. They're worried that they can only have that relationship, and even if that relationship is unhealthy or bad, it's better to be in an unhealthy, bad, abusive relationship than being in one where you're just not where you're alone with yourself, because that's even worse. So people who have an anxious attachment style, a lot of the times what I've seen in when I coach or even in my own experiences, there's some self-worth work to do there where people need to recognize, oh, I just need to, this area of me is a little off, or this area of me is always giving because I don't feel worthy within myself. There are a lot of people with anxious attachment styles are afraid to be alone. Does that make sense, you guys? So really, if you notice that your partner or yourself has an anxious attachment style, the best thing that you can do is just bring awareness to it and then ask yourself, how can I learn to trust this relationship more? A lot of the times, people who have an anxious attachment style, they can be irrational, they can be sporadic, they can be overly emotional, they can complain that everyone of the opposite sex is really cold and heartless, when that's not really the truth. And so a lot of individuals who have this attachment style, they're just worried and nervous that that person is going to leave them in the relationship, and they don't want to be left. They don't want things to drop off. Does that make sense? Beautiful. So we went over secure and we went over anxious attachment styles. Now, the next one that I want to go over is the avoidant attachment style. And the avoidant attachment types are extremely independent. they're self-directed, and often uncomfortable with intimacy. This was me for a while. For me, I would always avoid, I mean, it wasn't until about 2.5, 3 years ago to where I was able to say, yes, I want to stay in this relationship and be committed. I thought that I was always a committed individual, but then life and my own pattern showed me that I actually wasn't. And it wasn't until about 2.5 years ago where I realized, no, I actually want commitment. I'm not afraid of that. And so this attachment style I'm very aware of just from my own experience. I've also coached people with this attachment style before, but they're people with avoidant attachment styles. They're extremely independent. They're self-directed. They're often uncomfortable with intimacy. So when people get too close, they might be a little bit nervous or scared. They might close down. They're commitment phobes, and they're experts at rationalizing their way out of any intimate situation. So they regularly complain about feeling crowded or suffocated when people try to get too close to them. And in every relationship, they always have an exit strategy. They're always ready just to shoot out and say, I'm going to try something else. And they often construct their lifestyle in a way to avoid commitment or too much intimate contact because they feel most safe and secure when they're not open. Does that make sense? So some people feel safe and secure when they can latch onto someone else, and other people feel safe and secure when they're completely not latched onto anyone. Does that make sense, you guys? So it's really important to recognize which attachment style you are. You know, a good example of this is someone who overworks. Maybe they work 80 hours a week and then they get annoyed when, their partner wants to see them more than once on the weekend. This would be someone who had the avoidant attachment style. And this was definitely my choice, my preference at times in my life. Or this, if, for example, maybe from a woman's perspective, let's say she dates a lot of guys over the course of over the course of years, and she tells them all that she doesn't want anything serious, and then she ends up leaving the relationship because she just gets tired of them. That would be a woman who has an avoidant attachment style. So it's really important to recognize what attachment style we are so we can see the pattern and then break the pattern if we want and open up to deeper and better relationship. Guys, does this all make sense? So far we've gone over the secure attachment style, we've gone over the avoidant attachment style, and we've gone over the anxious avoidant attachment style. So all these attachment styles are ways that we connect with other human beings and how much we open ourselves up to them or close ourselves off. The anxious avoidant attachment style is the last one that we have to go over. Now, this is really a combination of both worlds. It's a combination of the anxious attachment style and the avoidant attachment style. And this brings up, this is really like the worst of both worlds. Anxious avoidant attachment styles, this is characterized by people who are worried and concerned about intimacy and about commitment, but at the same time, they're also want deep commitment and want someone to be close to them on the deepest level, but they're afraid to admit that. And so these individuals are really fearful. They're full of a lot of uncertainty. They might lash out a lot. They spend a lot of time alone. They're usually miserable. They're usually in abusive and dysfunctional relationships. And it's because they're anxious and they're avoidant. So they're anxious if people get too, if they're anxious if people aren't close to them and serving them and helping them. But at the same time, they don't want people to be close. And only a small percentage of the population is anxious and avoidant. But this style is really deadly, and it's really just, it's not a healthy lifestyle. It's not a healthy way to do relationship at all. Frankly, individuals who are in anxious and avoidant attachment styles, they're everything is kind of doomed from the start because they can't fully open up and commit to someone, and they can't show true intimacy, while at the same time they're really scared to be alone. And so they end up in this constant spiral. And usually that attachment style comes from childhood. They had some sort of bad parenting style. They weren't raised properly. They didn't have someone loving them and caring for them. So if you're in this anxious attachment style way of being, there is hope. It's just that you have to do a lot of inner work and recognize why you're running from others, why you're afraid to be open, but also why you need at the same time to cling to people. I'm going to get into your question a little bit later, Apurva. We're almost done here. And guys, if you have any questions or thoughts as we go through these, please feel free to share them. Just you can put them up on the screen and then we'll go deeper into it. So really all of these styles, the secure attachment style, the anxious attachment style, the avoidant attachment style, then the anxious avoidant attachment style, all of these different styles you'll be able to work with over time. Like you can upgrade. I remember I used to just be the avoidant attachment style. That was it. I had an early relationship with my mother that was very overbearing, and so I felt like I was never free in relationship. So I avoided relationship a lot of the time because that made me feel safe and secure. I could be in my own little bubble. But then once I kind of dealt with those issues and those challenges, then I was able to be more secure, and I was okay with opening myself up to relationship and drawing boundaries if I needed to draw boundaries. So you can upgrade into higher levels of relationship. It may take time. The point is that you can exhibit any of these tendencies or one strategy depending on the situation and at different times. So everyone has a dominant strategy. So everyone might have a little bit of these, but one might be more than the other. Remember, this is all happening. It's not just you're only avoidant or you're only secure or you're only avoidant anxious. You might have a little bit of all these, but some might be more pronounced than the other. For me, I know I would test really high on the secure attachment style, but I still might have a little bit of an avoidant style there as well. Great. Now, how are attachment styles formed? I want to go into a little bit deeper into this. Well, really, it starts when we're in our childhood, as most things. So our first imprint of another human being or how we relate to another human being comes from our parents. It comes from our mother and our father. And so if that's however your first imprint or bonding experiences with your initial parents, that's going to affect the way that you bond and the way that you interact with other human beings down the road. So this blueprint or this imprint can get imprinted into us and then carry us into our future relationships and how those relationships function. Now, the great thing about this is as we grow and develop, you can always shift, you can always change. There's a lot of theories out there that say that once you're past a certain age, you can't change or shift. But in my line of work, I've seen human beings change their attachment styles in their 20s all the way up into their 30s and 40s. So you can always change if need be. It just takes doing the inner work and going into the inside. Does that make sense, you guys? So really this initial blueprint that we have in early childhood, that is what allows us to form relationships in the future. And it's usually that initial imprint from our mother or father that determines how we relate to other human beings. And then after that, it expands to the social world. So you take that initial imprint and then you start connecting with other individuals outside of your initial family into the social world, and then that starts to influence your attachment styles as well too. Does this all make sense? I hope this is making sense for you guys. So usually what I see, people who have secure attachment styles, they've developed in childhood, and they were developed in childhood by infants who regularly had their needs met, and they received ample quantities of love and affection. So they felt competent among their peers, but also comfortable with their shortcomings to a certain degree. And so they can exhibit healthy, strong boundaries. They can communicate their needs well into their relationships, and they're not afraid to leave a bad one if they think they need to leave that relationship. So secure attachment styles really are formed by parents who are very caring and who are there for their children. Now, anxious attachment strategies they're a little bit different. They're developed in childhood by infants who receive love and care with unpredictable sufficiency. So what does that mean? It means that you might have shown up in life and you're not sure whether your parents were going to be there for you or not. So your parents might have had too many responsibilities. They might have, left you places. They might have not been able to care for you in the way that you needed to be cared for to fully trust human relationship. And so, if that's the case, then it's important to recognize that all you need to do is build trust in human relationship again. And how that happens is by putting yourself out there and developing human relationship. Anyone who has an anxious attachment style didn't have their primary caregivers be there for them in a way that they needed to be there, in a way that they needed them to be there so they could develop a healthy relationship, so they could develop trust in the relationship. Does that make sense, you guys? So, romantic relationships have often been overly idealized, and people rely too heavily on that other person for their own self esteem. That's usually where the anxious attachment style exists. We see a lot of this in movies like Disney and just in media where you have people who are just madly in love with each other. Like The Notebook. It's the worst. It's the worst type of relationship possible, where people are so dependent upon each other for love. But that's actually really unhealthy. That's an anxious attachment style. Both individuals think they know what they want, then they go for it, and then they don't know what they want, and so they're worried, they need each other, but then at the same time they're afraid of commitment, and they go back and forth and cause a lot of chaos. And this comes from that initial imprint from childhood where we had parents who might have not been there for us when we really needed them to be there for us. Does that make sense? Does this make sense, you guys? So that all these attachment styles are always formed from childhood. It's just finding, it's really just finding and figuring out how to overcome our initial imprint. And that only happens by getting into new relationship and allowing life to prove you wrong. Let's get into the avoidant attachment style and really how that's formed in childhood. This is developed in childhood by infants who only get some of their needs met while the rest are neglected. So, for instance, let's say you get fed regularly, right? So you're always given your food, but you're not held enough. If this is you, right? If this is your attachment style, this happened because you were given some needs, but then other needs weren't met. So you learned to hold an opinion of your primary caregivers that was, okay, they're not fully trustworthy and I have to depend on myself. I can't depend on anyone else, I have to depend on myself. No one else is trustworthy. And if you're in the avoidant attachment style, you might hold a negative view of others, but also a positive view of yourself because you learn to depend on yourself. You learn to become more independent. You say, you know what? People can maybe help me with a couple things, but I can't trust anyone. I have to fully trust myself. And so you don't depend on your romantic relationships for intimacy. You don't feel like you need emotional support from others. And so you kind of just become your own source of independence, joy, and emotional support. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's healthy, but the secure attachment styles recognize that they do need support from others. They do need to vent to others. They do need help from other people. So the avoidant attachment style, if that's you, it's just that you had a relationship or an initial imprint with your caregivers that said, you know what, these people can give me, my mom and dad or my caregivers can give me a little bit, but they can't give me everything that I need. So I really got to look out for myself. I really got to become strikingly independent. And there's nothing wrong with becoming independent. I would say becoming independent just from my own experience and because I was more of an avoidant attachment style. I think it's important to be independent in the sense that you trust yourself. However, if it gets to a point where you're avoiding intimacy in other relationship, well, then you might be cutting off yourself off to a really beautiful life. So really what we want to do here is learn to work with our strategy, whatever attachment strategy that we have, recognize it and then develop it. And guys, if you're just joining us, we're almost done here. We're going to do some questions at the end of this, and we're going to get into this deeper. I see some questions being asked here on the right side. So if you have any questions or thoughts, don't worry, we will get into that. It just might take some time. Once I'm almost done presenting here, and then we'll take it a little bit deeper. So is this making sense so far? So we have a total of 4 different attachment styles. And so I'm gonna bring up my screen here and just share this with you, just in case you guys are just joining me now. So these are the 4 types of attachment styles. Hopefully you guys can see this. Beautiful. So we first have avoidant. We second have anxious. Thirdly, we have secure. And then fourthly, we have avoidant anxious. So these are all the different types of attachment styles that we have. And the avoidant is you run from intimacy. Okay, so running from intimacy. The anxious is you cling. So there's this definition that guys have in the locker room where they call, oh man, she's a stage 5 clinger. That's what anxious attachment style is. Then you have secure, which is I am healthily independent and open. This is probably the most preferred and best. So we have independent. And then we have avoidant anxious, which is the worst of 1 and 2, which is run and cling. It's the worst of both worlds. Does this make sense, you guys? So these are the four attachment styles. Now the cool thing here is, and I'm gonna stop the sharing now. The cool thing is all of these can be shifted and changed at any moment in your life. Now it takes time, it takes awareness, and it takes energy, but any moment you can shift into a different attachment strategy or an attachment style. It's just knowing how to switch into it. It's just knowing how to do the work, how to go internal, and then watch that internal work shift your external experience. So let's get into the last one here of anxious avoidant. The anxious avoidant type is that always comes from an abusive or negligent childhood. So if you came from an anxious avoidant type childhood, like if that's your attachment style, it's because you had a very abusive or negligent childhood. The anxious avoidant types often have a hard time relating to other people at all. They seek and crave intimacy and independence in their romantic interactions, but at the same time, they don't want people to get too close because they don't trust them. So really, if you're anxious and avoidant type, it just meant that you had probably a really rough, hard childhood, and it was really it was really the formation of a dysfunctional relationship with your primary caregivers. And the great thing about that, though, is you can get out of that. You can get out of that if you do the inner work. So different attachment types, they tend to configure themselves into relationships into predictable ways. So I'll just tell you this: with secure attachment styles, they're capable of dating or handling. They're capable of being both anxious and avoidant at times, but they might express a little bit of anxiety. They might express a little bit of avoidant, but they're aware of it and they can communicate it. They're open. They're comfortable enough with themselves to give anxious types of people reassurance that they need, but they're also capable of giving avoidant types of individuals the space they need without feeling threatened themselves. So when you're in a secure attachment style, and people are exhibiting anxious or avoidant type behavior, you know it and you can see it from a mile away, and you give people the space that they need, or you go a little bit deeper into it when you need to go a little bit deeper into it, and you know how to modulate that. The anxious and avoidants frequently end up in relationships with one another more often, because that's that reflection back that they're getting from their external world. So they're anxious on the inside. Oh, I need to be in relationship and clingy to someone, and then they attract someone who is avoidant and who wants to get away from them. And so the anxious and avoidance, they usually attract each other a lot of the times, and that dynamic plays out so they can learn about their own attachment style and how they can overcome that. Avoidant types are so good at putting others off that oftentimes it's only the anxious types who are willing to stick around and put in the extra effort to get them to open up. Does that make sense? So some avoidant types are so good at putting others off that a lot of the times it's the anxious, the clingy ones who are the only ones who are willing to stick around and deal with the avoidant types and being willing to be treated that way. So I'll give you a good example of this. Let's say a man who's avoidant, he may be able to successfully shirk a secure woman's pushes for increased intimacy. So he might say, "Oh, I don't want to be around this woman. She wants intimacy," and he starts to avoid it. But then that secure woman will accept the rejection and move on. And then he'll be left thinking, "Oh man, what do I need to do? Why did she leave me?" And then he'll eventually grow into more of a secure attachment style as opposed to just an anxious as opposed to an avoidant attachment style. But let's say an anxious woman who's always worried and fearful of losing man, so she's like a stage 5 clinger. Let's say she shows up in a relationship. She might become more determined by a man who pushes her away. She might say, "No, I'm going to go after this. I'm going to make this happen." So she'll resort to calling him for weeks or months on end until he finally caves in and commits to her, because she never gives up. Does that make sense? So these relationship patterns, they all come out and express themselves in different ways. And it always stems back to our initial imprint that was given to us by our primary caregivers. Now, the great thing is you can always upgrade into a new attachment style. That's the wonderful thing about this. So often all of these relationship styles have some degree of dysfunctional equilibrium and balance. They usually fall into a pattern of chaser and chasee. "Oh, I'm chasing you," or "you chasing me." Both roles, the anxious and the avoidant types, they need to learn how to feel comfortable with intimacy. They need to learn how to feel comfortable with just being with that other person. And that comes down to trusting that other individual, not chasing, not running, but learning that, okay, this person is trustworthy and they're going to be there for me when I need them. And that's all it comes down to. So you can always get over if you're watching this and you're saying that, "Oh my gosh, I have this attachment style, I need to get out of this." There's hope. You can always shift your attachment style. It's just doing the inner work and recognizing how to come from a space of learning to be open to something new. A lot of the times, sometimes when I'll coach individuals, they'll think, they'll come to me and they'll say, "Well, this is how I was in childhood." "Hey, LaShawn, good to see you." They'll say, "This is how I was in childhood and I can't get over this." And it's like, well, no, you can. You can choose any new attachment style. It just takes awareness of the attachment style that you're in and then working through that. And it's really that simple. It's just working through it and recognizing that, oh, I'm in this attachment style. I just need to shift some things and try some new things out. That's all it comes down to. Beautiful, guys. Guys, if you found this helpful, please subscribe. Please share with any family or friends. I want this work to go deeper out into the world. If you have any questions for me, feel free to put up in the comments section below. Also, check out my Sacred Relationships series that Laura and I are doing now. If you haven't seen this, we're doing live coaching. We're doing interviews with other individuals. So if you want to join that as well, feel free to check out the link in the YouTube description box. Let's get into some Q&A here. Let's get into some Q&A. What questions do you guys have for me? I'm going to go to Apurva's question here. This is good. So Apurva said, what does it mean when a guy is comfortable to talk with you alone, but not in public or other friends? It looks like non-trustable to me. What do you think? Yeah, that's a great question. So if you feel like you're worried, if you feel like you're worried about this individual not being public with your relationship, chances are he might just be more of a private person. Intimacy to him might be just, let's keep it between you and me. Now, the other end of that is what I'm hearing is that there's might be a little concern for you that if this guy is not wanting to share the relationship publicly, then it's because he's talking to other women or men or something like this. But that's not always the case. What I think I would do is I would ask him about it. I would ask him. I mean, what do you think is the best way to handle the situation, Apurva? For me personally, I would just ask him, but what do you think would be the best way to handle this situation? And guys, if you want to do some one-on-one work or you want to have a conversation and take it deeper, just check out the comment section there. I'm putting a link in there. You can reach out and connect with me if you want to explore coaching and how to choose different attachment styles and how to work on yourself and do the inner work. So just check out the link in the comments section there as well too if you want to connect at any point. I'm going to go to Apurva's next question here. So Apurva asks, how long does it take to break an attachment style? Yeah, that's a great question. So an attachment style really comes from our initial imprint in childhood. Now, it's different for everyone. For some people, I see it takes them, a whole two or 3 years to get over an attachment style. It depends on how emotional and how big that initial imprint was on you in childhood. However, some I've seen them change and shift their attachment styles in 6 months. It really all depends, but it comes down to doing the inner work. How much do you want to do on the inner world? If you're like for me, I was an avoidant attachment style. I would say women are always just going to take away from my work. They can't support me. And that was how I thought about it. And that wasn't true at all. Really, what was true was I was just afraid to really fully open up because I thought it was going to take time away from my passions. And then I started doing the inner work with a coach, and I had a therapist before that, but then I switched into coaching. I started doing some more inner work with the coach, and it finally got to a point where I recognized, oh, wow, I'm just an avoidant attachment style. What would it look like for me to be a secure attachment style? And as I opened up my heart and I realized deeper imprints from my childhood, then suddenly everything started shifting into a healthier relationship style, which was the secure relationship style. I can draw boundaries. I can understand when a person's feeling anxious. I can understand when a person's feeling avoidant. And it really became that simple. And so then now if people come into my life, they can come into it. That's fine. If they leave, they leave. I'm okay with people coming and going. And if any point, any relationship, romantic, friendship, whatever it may be, if that gets unhealthy, then I point it out and I say, no, this isn't okay. This isn't okay. I'm not going to accept this type of behavior, and I let them go. And if someone's trying to cling to me too much, or there's a lot of that needy energy, then I feel that and I'll just speak to it and I'll have compassion for that other person, but I won't allow that to overwhelm me. So really these 4 types of attachment styles, we can use all of them. We might have all parts of these attachment styles a little bit within us. Remember, the 4 attachment styles are all at different levels. Like we might have them at certain percentages. So if you're just joining me on the live right now, I'm going to bring up my screen here. Can you guys all see this? So these are the 4 different attachment styles. You have the avoidant, and then after that you have the anxious, Then after that, you have the secure. And then after that, you have the avoidant anxious. And remember, the avoidant is just, I'm running away from intimacy. I'm scared of intimacy. If I open up and show you who I truly am, then you're going to take advantage of me. And then the other one is the anxious. And the anxious is, I cling to you. I need you in my life because I feel worried and insecure in the world if you're not in my life. And then there's the secure, which is the healthiest and the best. And if you've had a healthy childhood where people always met your needs, then you're in a secure attachment style. That's where you're really independent. You can draw boundaries as need be. You open yourself up to people, or close yourself off as needed. And then finally, there's the avoidant anxious, and the avoidant anxious style comes down to people who run and cling, and this is the most destructive. This is, I need to run away. I don't trust you, but at the same time, I need you, and I hate the fact that I don't trust you, but I need you at the same time. And so, really, which style do you guys? And remember, you can be in any one of these. Like I would say, I'm probably 80% secure, right? So I'll say I'm like 80% secure. That's not a good drawing at all. I'd say I'm 80% secure and about like 20% avoidant. Like that, those are my percentages. I don't have any anxious and I don't have any avoidant anxious. I'm like 80% secure and 20% avoidant. That's my attachment style now. But at one point, I was like 80% avoidant and probably 20% anxious. So it really depends. This really depends on your upbringing, but it can always shift. You can always shift if you want to shift. Does this make sense, everyone? Are you guys getting this? Great. What other questions do you guys have? Any other questions? Beautiful. That's all I got for today, guys. If you found this helpful, please subscribe. Please share with any family or friends. I want this work to go out into the world. If you guys ever want to connect or have some more thoughts that you want to bounce off of me, just check out the link in the comments section. You can fill that out. I'll be going live on a more daily basis. We do have our next live coming up with Laura tomorrow. So tomorrow, let me just check the schedule. I believe we have 2 interviews coming up here. Let me check the schedule here. Okay, beautiful. Yeah, so tomorrow, Laura and I are going live on Tantra and how to heal the body using the Tantra or a deep connection. And then we also have an interview with Mayara. Now, Mayara, we had her on before. I'm sorry, not Mayara. Mayara will be later on the week. We have an interview with Mina. So Mina is a coach who does a lot of work, relationship work. And so that'll be going on tomorrow at 7 p.m. MST, 9 p.m. EST. So be sure to tune in tomorrow for our 2 live videos. The first one will be a live stream with Laura and I on how to use Tantra. And then the next one will be with Mina and her relationship coaching. So be sure to be looking out for that tomorrow. Other than that, that's all I have. Thank you so much for joining me, you guys. Have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you all soon. Bye for now.